Mike Tyson had always been a man of principle, and that sunny afternoon at Kennedy Airport was no different. The former heavyweight champion stood in line at the check-in counter, dressed in his signature black outfit, waiting patiently like everyone else despite his celebrity status. The airline staff recognized him immediately. Their eyes widened, and whispers spread through the terminal. A young attendant rushed forward, offering him priority boarding and access to the exclusive VIP lounge. Tyson accepted graciously, remembering how far he'd come from his humble beginnings in Brooklyn. In the VIP lounge, Tyson settled into a comfortable leather seat by the window, watching planes take off into the clear blue sky. He was traveling to Los Angeles for a business meeting, something that still amazed him, how life had transformed him from a fierce boxer to a businessman. As he sat there, sipping water and scrolling through his phone, a commotion broke out at the lounge entrance. A well-dressed businessman in an expensive suit was arguing with the lounge attendant, his voice getting louder by the second. Tyson tried to mind his own business, but the man's words caught his attention. "Do you know who I am? I demand the best seat in this lounge." The businessman's face was red with anger. "That's the only spot with a proper view, and I always sit there when I travel." Tyson realized the man was pointing at his seat. The lounge attendant, a young woman barely in her 20s, was trying her best to handle the situation professionally. "Sir, we have many other comfortable seats available. Mr. Tyson is currently dash." "I don't care who he is," the businessman interrupted. "I'm a Platinum Elite member, and I pay thousands for my membership. I'm not going to stand here while someone takes my usual spot." The other passengers in the lounge watched uncomfortably, some recording the scene on their phones. Tyson could feel their eyes darting between him and the angry businessman. He'd faced many challenges in his life, but this one was different. It wasn't about throwing punches or showing strength, it was about something more important. Tyson thought about his journey, about the lessons he'd learned about humility and respect. He remembered the days when people had prejudged him, when they'd expected him to react with anger or violence. But he wasn't that person anymore. Rising slowly from his seat, Tyson's imposing figure drew everyone's attention. The businessman took a step back, suddenly realizing who he'd been yelling about. The lounge fell silent. But what happened next surprised everyone. "Here, brother," Tyson said calmly, gathering his belongings. "You can have this seat. It's not worth causing all this trouble over." The businessman stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, as Tyson walked past him with dignity. But instead of finding another seat in the lounge, Tyson headed for the exit. The young attendant hurried after him. "I don't care who he is," the businessman interrupted. "I'm a Platinum Elite member, and I pay thousands for my membership. I'm not going to stand here while someone takes my usual spot." The other passengers in the lounge watched uncomfortably, some recording the scene on their phones. Tyson could feel their eyes darting between him and the angry businessman. He'd faced many challenges in his life, but this one was different. It wasn't about throwing punches or showing strength, it was about something more important. Tyson thought about his journey, about the lessons he'd learned about humility and respect. He remembered the days when people had prejudged him, when they'd expected him to react with anger or violence. But he wasn't that person anymore. Rising slowly from his seat, Tyson's imposing figure drew everyone's attention. The businessman took a step back, suddenly realizing who he'd been yelling about. The lounge fell silent. But what happened next surprised everyone. "Here, brother," Tyson said calmly, gathering his belongings. "You can have this seat. It's not worth causing all this trouble over." The businessman stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, as Tyson walked past him with dignity. But instead of finding another seat in the lounge, Tyson headed for the exit. The young attendant hurried after him. "Mr. Tyson, please, you don't have to leave. We can find you another comfortable spot," she pleaded. Tyson turned to her with a gentle smile. "Thank you, but I think I'll wait at the regular gate with everyone else. Sometimes the best view isn't about what you're looking at, but what you stand for." As he walked through the terminal, Tyson could hear the whispers and see people nudging each other, pointing phones in his direction. But this time, it wasn't because of his boxing reputation or his fame. It was because they'd witnessed something unexpected, a champion choosing peace over pride. At the regular gate, Tyson sat down next to an elderly couple who were initially startled by his presence. But as the minutes passed, they found themselves engaged in a warm conversation about their grandchildren and life's simple pleasures. Word of what had happened in the VIP lounge spread quickly through the airport. Staff members were shocked, not by the incident itself, but by Tyson's response. The airline's manager rushed to the gate, apologizing profusely and insisting that Tyson return to the lounge. But Tyson just shook his head. "I'm good right here," he said, continuing his conversation with the elderly couple. "Sometimes life puts you in situations where you can show others what real strength looks like. It's not about throwing your weight around or demanding respect, it's about knowing when to step back and let your actions speak louder than words." The story might have ended there, but what happened next would change the entire atmosphere of the flight. The airline crew, moved by Tyson's humility, began talking among themselves. The passengers at the gate, who had witnessed everything, started sharing their own stories of times when they'd faced similar situations. As boarding time approached, something remarkable happened. The same businessman from the lounge appeared at the gate. His face was different now, the anger replaced by what appeared to be shame. He walked directly to where Tyson was sitting. "Mr. Tyson," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I want to apologize for my behavior earlier. I let my ego get the better of me. The view from that seat doesn't seem so important anymore." Tyson stood up, towering over the businessman, but his expression was kind. "No hard feelings, brother. We all have those moments. The important thing is what we learn from them." The other passengers watched as the two men shook hands. What could have been an ugly scene of conflict had transformed into a moment of genuine human connection. The elderly couple sitting next to Tyson smiled knowingly, they had just witnessed a masterclass in grace under pressure. As the flight began boarding, the airline staff approached Tyson one last time, offering him priority boarding. This time, he accepted, but not before inviting the elderly couple to board with him. "These are my new friends," he said with a grin. "We've got some stories to finish." The incident quickly became more than just another celebrity story. It became a lesson in how to handle difficult situations with dignity and grace. The videos taken by passengers would later go viral, not for the drama, but for the unexpected way Tyson had transformed a potential conflict into a moment of unity. That day, Mike Tyson didn't just give up a VIP seat, he showed everyone in that airport what true championship character looks like outside the ring. His next move hadn't just shaken the airline team, it had touched everyone who witnessed it, reminding them that sometimes the biggest victories come from choosing peace over pride, and respect over righteousness. The impact of Tyson's actions at the airport didn't end with the boarding process. As passengers settled into their seats on the Los Angeles-bound flight, there was an unusual atmosphere of warmth and camaraderie that you rarely find on commercial flights. The flight attendants, who had heard about the incident in the lounge, treated everyone with extra care, inspired by Tyson's example. They shared quiet words of appreciation with him as they passed by his seat, not just because of who he was, but because of what he'd done. Tyson found himself sitting in an exit row, where he'd requested a seat with extra legroom. The elderly couple he'd met at the gate, Tom and Betty, were seated across the aisle from him. As the plane taxied to the runway, other passengers couldn't help but glance in their direction, amazed at how the former heavyweight champion was completely engrossed in hearing Betty's stories about her time as a schoolteacher in the 1960s. "You know, Mr. Tyson," Betty said, her eyes twinkling, "what you did back there reminded me of something that happened in my classroom 40 years ago. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who knows when to walk away. The businessman from the lounge incident was seated several rows ahead, but his presence was felt throughout the cabin. During the flight, he was noticeably quiet, occasionally looking back at Tyson with an expression that suggested he was deep in thought. About an hour into the flight, turbulence hit. It wasn't severe, but it was enough to make some passengers nervous. A young boy, maybe 7 or 8 years old, began to cry softly in the row behind Tyson. Without hesitation, Tyson turned around and started talking to him. "Hey, champ," he said gently, "you know what this reminds me of? The butterflies I used to get before stepping into the ring. But you want to know a secret? Those butterflies made me stronger. They reminded me I was alive, that I was about to do something exciting." The boy's eyes widened, his fear momentarily forgotten. "Really? But you're Mike Tyson. You're not scared of anything." Tyson laughed, a warm, genuine sound that carried through the cabin. "Everyone feels fear, young man. The trick isn't not being scared, it's about how you handle being scared. Look around, we're literally flying through the sky like birds. That's pretty amazing, right?" As Tyson spoke to the boy, other passengers listened in. The simple wisdom in his words resonated with everyone who could hear him. The businessman, who had been pretending to work on his laptop, closed it and turned around to listen. The flight attendants paused their service, touched by the scene unfolding. Here was Mike Tyson, once known as the most intimidating man in boxing, gently coaching a young boy through his fear of turbulence. It was a side of him that many had never expected to see. When the drink service came around, the businessman did something unexpected. He bought drinks for everyone in Tyson's row, including Tom and Betty. When the flight attendant delivered them, he stood up and walked back to Tyson's row. "I've been thinking a lot about what happened at the airport," he said, his voice carrying humility that hadn't been there before. "I've spent so many years thinking that being important meant getting your way. Today, you showed me that true importance is about how you treat others." Tyson accepted the drink with a nod. "Join us," he said, gesturing to an empty seat nearby. "Betty here was just telling me about the time she organized a school play with no budget and 30 eager fifth graders." For the next hour, an impromptu gathering formed in the middle of the plane. Passengers from nearby rows joined in the conversation, sharing stories and laughter. The businessman, whose name was Richard, revealed that he'd been traveling to Los Angeles to close a major deal, and the stress had gotten the better of him. "Sometimes we get so caught up in where we're going," Tyson reflected, "that we forget to pay attention to how we're getting there. Every interaction is a chance to make someone's day better or worse. It's like boxing, you can win the match but lose the respect of the crowd. What's the real victory there?" As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, the young boy who had been scared of the turbulence asked if he could take a picture with Tyson. Soon, other passengers joined in, not just for photos but to thank him for turning what could have been an unpleasant flight into something memorable. The airline staff had been quietly observing everything. The lead flight attendant made a call to the ground crew in Los Angeles. By the time they landed, word had spread throughout the airline staff about what had transpired. As passengers began to deplane, the pilot emerged from the cockpit. He wasn't just there to say goodbye, he wanted to shake Tyson's hand. "Mr. Tyson," he said, "in all my years of flying, I've never seen anyone transform the energy of an entire flight the way you did today. You've reminded us all that leadership isn't about position, it's about influence." Richard, the businessman, waited at the gate to say a final goodbye. He handed Tyson his business card. "I was heading to LA thinking I knew everything about success," he said. "Today you taught me more about true success in a few hours than I've learned in years of business school." As Tyson walked through LAX, he reflected on how a simple choice to give up a VIP seat had sparked a chain reaction of positivity. He'd spent years in the ring, known for his power to knock people down. But today, he'd shown a different kind of strength, the power to lift people up. The story spread quickly through social media, but not in the way most celebrity stories do. There was no scandal, no confrontation, no viral moment of conflict. Instead, people shared stories of how the incident had inspired them to handle their own challenging situations differently. The airline's corporate office received numerous messages from passengers on that flight, each describing how Tyson's actions had impacted them. But perhaps the most meaningful message came from Richard, the businessman, who wrote a lengthy email about how a humbling experience had changed his perspective on success and leadership. As Tyson headed to his business meeting in Los Angeles, he carried with him not just his luggage, but the knowledge that sometimes life's greatest victories happen far from any spotlight, in those quiet moments when we choose kindness over comfort, and understanding over ego. The story of what happened on that flight didn't stay contained within the airline industry. By the time Tyson reached his hotel in Los Angeles, the impact of his actions was already rippling through social media and news outlets. But what happened next would take the story in an unexpected direction. The following morning, as Tyson prepared for his business meeting, his phone buzzed continuously with notifications. The video of him comforting the young boy during turbulence had gone viral, catching the attention of major news networks. But it wasn't the viral fame that caught Tyson's attention, it was a message from an unexpected source. The airline's CEO had reached out personally, not with the usual corporate damage control approach, but with a genuine proposition. He wanted to meet with Tyson to discuss how they could incorporate the lessons from that flight into their company's training program. Your handling of that situation, the CEO's message read, demonstrated exactly the kind of human touch we want our staff to embody. Would you consider helping us develop a program about handling difficult situations with grace? As Tyson sat in his hotel room reading the message, he thought about all the times in his life when people had expected him to react with anger or aggression. How many times had those expectations become a self-fulfilling prophecy? Here was a chance to change that narrative. During his business meeting that afternoon, the discussion kept returning to the airport incident. The executives he was meeting with had seen the videos and heard the stories. What was supposed to be a discussion about business investments turned into a deeper conversation about leadership and human interaction. "You know what's interesting," one executive said, leaning forward in his chair. "We spend millions on corporate training programs, but what you demonstrated yesterday can't be taught in a conventional way. It has to be lived." Back at his hotel that evening, Tyson received another surprising message. Richard, the businessman from the flight, had sent a lengthy email. He explained how their interaction had prompted him to reassess his entire approach to business and life. "I walked into that airport thinking I was entitled to special treatment because of my status," Richard wrote. "I walked out realizing that true status comes from how you treat people, not from what you demand from them." The next day, Tyson agreed to meet with the airline's CEO. The meeting took place in a modest conference room, not the elaborate boardroom one might expect. Present were also several flight attendants from different routes, including some who had witnessed the original incident. "We don't want to create just another corporate training video," the CEO explained. "We want to start a movement within our company that emphasizes human connection over protocol." As they discussed ideas, one of the flight attendants spoke up. She shared how she'd been dealing with difficult passengers for years, always following the handbook's procedures. "But watching how Mr. Tyson handled that situation showed me that sometimes the best response isn't in any manual." The young attendant from the original VIP lounge incident was also there. She described how Tyson's response had given her a new perspective on handling confrontational situations. "It wasn't just what you did," she said, looking at Tyson. "It was how you made everyone feel in that moment." Together, they began outlining a program that would focus on real human interactions rather than scripted responses. Tyson shared stories from his own journey of personal growth, about learning to choose peace over confrontation, and understanding that true strength often lies in restraint. The program they envisioned wouldn't just be about customer service, it would be about human dignity. About recognizing that behind every angry outburst or demanding customer was a person dealing with their own struggles and pressures. As the meeting progressed, someone mentioned the elderly couple from the flight, Tom and Betty. Their presence had added another layer to the story, how genuine human connection could transform any space, even a crowded airplane, into a community. The CEO shared something surprising. Since the incident, they'd noticed a slight but meaningful change in passenger behavior on flights where the story had been shared during crew briefings. Something about knowing what had happened was inspiring both staff and passengers to be more patient, more understanding. People often think change has to be dramatic, Tyson reflected during the meeting. But sometimes it's the quiet moments of choosing differently that create the biggest impact. By the end of the meeting, they had outlined not just a training program, but a new approach to human interaction in the airline industry. The CEO made an unusual request. He wanted Tyson to be part of implementing this new approach, not just as a figurehead, but as someone who could speak from experience about the power of choosing dignity over division. As Tyson left the meeting, he passed through the same airport where everything had started. The VIP lounge was still there, but it seemed different now. He stopped by briefly, not to sit in the premium seats, but to thank the staff for their part in what had become a much bigger story. The young attendant who had first welcomed him asked if he wanted his usual spot by the window. Tyson smiled and shook his head. "The best view," he said, "is the one that lets you see people as they really are, not just as they appear to be." That evening, as Tyson prepared to return home, he received countless messages from people who had been touched by the story. But the one that meant the most came from the young boy on the plane. His mother had written to share how her son had handled a difficult situation at school, telling his friends, "Sometimes being strong means being kind, like Mike Tyson taught me." This wasn't just about one incident anymore. It had become a lesson about how small choices could create lasting change, how one moment of choosing peace over pride could inspire others to do the same. The story had transcended its original context, becoming a testament to the power of human dignity and understanding. The ripple effects of Tyson's actions continued to spread in unexpected ways. 3 weeks after the airport incident, he received an invitation to speak at a national conference on corporate culture and customer service. The theme was "Transforming Conflict into Connection," and organizers wanted him to share his perspective on that pivotal day. At first, Tyson hesitated. He'd given many speeches before, but they were usually about boxing, success, or overcoming personal struggles. This was different. This was about a simple moment that had somehow captured people's imagination and sparked a larger conversation about human dignity. The conference hall was packed when Tyson took the stage. In the audience were airline executives, customer service trainers, and business leaders from across the country. But what caught his attention were the familiar faces: Richard, the businessman from the flight, sitting in the front row, Tom and Betty, the elderly couple, who had been specially invited, and even the young boy and his mother. "People keep asking me what was going through my mind that day in the VIP lounge," Tyson began, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "The truth is, I wasn't thinking about making a statement or teaching a lesson. I was just remembering all the times in my life when people expected the worst from me, and how that expectation felt." He went on to describe how the incident had affected him personally. "You know, in the ring, every move is about power and dominance. But life isn't a boxing match. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is walk away, not because you're weak, but because you choose peace." During the Q&A session, a customer service manager from another airline asked how to train staff to handle difficult situations with such grace. Before Tyson could answer, Richard stood up and shared his perspective as the person who had caused the original conflict. "What Mr. Tyson did that day wasn't just about handling a difficult customer," Richard said, his voice full of emotion. "He showed me my own reflection, but he did it without shame or judgment. That's what changed me. Not the fact that I was wrong, but the way he allowed me to realize it on my own." The young boy who had been scared during the flight also spoke up, though his mother had to encourage him to use the microphone. "Mr. Tyson taught me that being brave doesn't mean not being scared," he said, his voice small but clear. "It means being kind even when others aren't." The airline's training program, developed with Tyson's input, was already showing remarkable results. Staff reported feeling more empowered to handle difficult situations, not by following rigid protocols, but by focusing on human connection. Customer satisfaction scores had improved, and there was a noticeable decrease in escalated conflicts. During a break in the conference, Tyson found himself in conversation with a group of young business professionals. One of them asked if he missed the adrenaline of boxing, the roar of the crowd when he dominated an opponent. "Let me tell you something about power," Tyson responded thoughtfully. "The strongest punch I ever threw doesn't compare to the strength it takes to show kindness when faced with anger. That's the real knockout punch, hitting negativity with understanding." Betty, who had been listening nearby, added her perspective. "What Mr. Tyson demonstrated that day wasn't just good customer service," she said. "It was good humanity. We've gotten so caught up in status and privilege that we've forgotten how to simply be decent to each other." The conference organizers had set up a special panel discussion featuring everyone involved in the original incident. The young airline attendant shared how the experience had changed her approach to her job. "Now, when I face a difficult situation, I don't just think about solving the problem. I think about transforming the energy, just like I watched Mr. Tyson do." The airline's CEO announced a new initiative inspired by the incident. They were introducing a "Dignity First" program across their entire network, focusing on treating every passenger with respect regardless of their status or behavior. The program would include training videos featuring reconstructions of the airport incident, along with interviews of those involved. As the conference drew to a close, something unexpected happened. Richard approached Tyson with a proposal. He wanted to start a foundation focused on teaching conflict resolution in schools and workplaces. The foundation would use the airport incident as a case study in how to transform confrontational situations. "Think about it," Richard said. "We could help people understand that true power isn't about dominance, it's about elevation. Elevating ourselves and others above our immediate reactions to find better solutions." The story had evolved far beyond a simple incident in an airport lounge. It had become a movement, a way of thinking about human interaction in an increasingly divided world. The viral videos and media coverage had captured the event, but it was the underlying message that continued to resonate. That evening, at a small dinner gathering after the conference, Tyson sat with Tom and Betty, Richard, the young boy and his mother, and several airline staff members. They weren't there as former boxer, businessmen, passengers, or employees, they were there as people who had experienced something transformative together. "You know what's amazing?" Tom said, looking around the table. "None of this would have happened if everyone had just behaved the way people expected them to. It took someone choosing differently to change everything." The young boy, more confident now than he had been on the flight, asked Tyson if he would come speak at his school. "Some kids at my school think being strong means being mean," he explained. "They need to hear your story." As Tyson looked around the table, he saw how a single moment of choosing peace over pride had created connections that transcended the usual boundaries of age, status, and background. It was a powerful reminder that every interaction carried the potential for transformation. The invitation to speak at the boys' school opened up a new chapter in this evolving story. Tyson arrived at Hamilton Elementary on a crisp morning, where excited whispers filled the hallways. The school assembly hall was packed with students from grades 3 through 6, their eyes wide with anticipation. The young boy from the flight, who everyone now knew as Tommy, proudly introduced Tyson to his classmates. But instead of talking about his boxing career or his championships, Tyson shared something different, the story of what real strength looks like outside the ring. "You know what's interesting?" Tyson began, scanning the young faces before him. "When I was your age, I thought being tough meant making sure nobody could push me around. I spent years believing that strength was about how hard you could hit. But life has taught me something different. The children sat in rapt attention as he continued. True strength isn't about who can push the hardest, it's about who can stand firm in kindness when it would be easier not to. It's like having a superpower, but instead of using it to knock people down, you use it to lift them up. During the question and answer session, a small girl raised her hand. But what if someone is really mean to you? Isn't it okay to be mean back? Tyson smiled, remembering similar thoughts from his own childhood. That's a great question. When someone's mean to you, they're often fighting their own battles that you can't see. Responding with kindness doesn't mean letting people walk all over you, it means being strong enough to show them a better way. The school principal watched in amazement as Tyson connected with the students, breaking down complex ideas about conflict resolution into stories they could understand. She later shared how bullying had been a growing concern at the school, and how this different perspective on strength might help change the dynamic. After the assembly, several teachers approached Tyson with tears in their eyes. One veteran teacher explained how she'd been struggling to teach these concepts for years. You've just shown them that being strong and being kind aren't opposite things, they're the same thing. That's powerful. The impact of Tyson's visit extended beyond that single school. Other schools in the district began requesting similar talks. The airport incident had evolved into a broader conversation about redefining strength for a new generation. Meanwhile, Richard's foundation was taking shape. He'd named it the Better Way Foundation, inspired by the transformation he'd experienced. The foundation's first project was developing a curriculum that combined Tyson's insights with practical conflict resolution strategies for schools and workplaces. The airline's Dignity First program was also gaining attention in the corporate world. Other companies began reaching out, interested in learning how they could implement similar approaches. The young attendant from the original incident had been promoted to lead trainer for the program, sharing her first-hand experience of witnessing how choosing dignity over confrontation could change everything. One afternoon, while reviewing materials for the foundation, Tyson received an unexpected call. It was from a prison rehabilitation program. They'd heard about the airport incident and the school talks, and they wanted to know if he would consider speaking to their inmates about choosing different responses to conflict. These men understand physical strength, the program director explained. But what you demonstrated, that kind of strength, that's what they need to learn about. Tyson agreed without hesitation. He knew firsthand how easy it was to let anger and pride drive your actions, and how challenging it could be to choose a different path. When he visited the prison, he didn't talk about his boxing victories. Instead, he talked about his biggest victory, learning to walk away from conflict with his dignity intact. The inmates listened intently as Tyson shared how giving up that VIP seat had led to something much more valuable than comfort or status. One inmate, tears in his eyes, shared how he'd ended up in prison because he couldn't walk away from a confrontation. I always thought walking away made you weak, he said. Now I see it takes more strength than staying to fight. Back in the corporate world, Richard's company had undergone its own transformation. He'd implemented new policies that emphasized treating everyone, from janitors to executives, with equal respect. The company's culture had shifted noticeably, with employee satisfaction scores rising and conflict-related complaints dropping significantly. Tom and Betty, the elderly couple from the flight, had become unexpected ambassadors for the movement. They were invited to speak at retirement communities about their experience, sharing how they'd witnessed a moment that challenged their own prejudices and expectations. Betty often told audiences, "We'd all read about Mike Tyson in the papers over the years. But seeing him that day showed us something powerful, that people can grow, can choose differently, can show us all a better way forward." The young boy, Tommy, had become something of a peacemaker at his school. When other kids would start to argue or fight, he'd often step in with words that had become famous among his classmates. What would Mike Tyson do? The phrase had caught on, not as a threat, but as a reminder that even the strongest person could choose peace. It became a shorthand for choosing dignity over drama, understanding over anger. As the story continued to spread, people began sharing their own experiences of choosing differently in difficult situations. Social media filled with hashtags like #ChoosePeace and #DignityFirst, each story adding to the growing movement. The airline reported a significant decrease in confrontational incidents across their network. Other airlines began adopting similar approaches, leading to a gradual shift in how the entire industry handled difficult situations with passengers. One evening, while watching the sunset from his home, Tyson reflected on how a single moment in an airport lounge had sparked such widespread change. He thought about all the people who had been touched by the story, the schoolchildren learning about true strength, the inmates discovering a different way to handle conflict, the corporate workers finding new ways to interact with dignity. It wasn't just about him anymore. It had become a reminder that every interaction carried the potential for transformation, that every moment offered a choice between reaction and response, between confrontation and connection. 6 months after the airport incident, the ripples of change had become waves. On a busy Tuesday morning, Tyson received a call from a major university's psychology department. They wanted to conduct a study on what they were calling the Tyson effect, how one person's choice to respond with dignity could create a cascade of positive changes in others. The lead researcher explained how they'd tracked the spread of behavioral changes stemming from the airport incident. It had started with the airline staff, moved through their passengers, and eventually reached into schools, businesses, and communities. The researcher's voice held a note of amazement as she shared their preliminary findings. "What's fascinating," she explained, "is how the story resonated across different cultures and backgrounds. It wasn't just about customer service anymore, it had become a template for handling conflict in any situation." Tyson agreed to participate in the study, but with one condition: they needed to include perspectives from everyone involved, from Richard to the airline staff, from Tommy to the prison inmates he'd spoken to. He wanted the research to show how change happens through connection, not isolation. Around the same time, Richard's Better Way Foundation was launching its first major initiative. They'd created a program called Choose Dignity that was being piloted in schools across 3 states. The program used role-playing exercises and real-world examples to teach students how to handle difficult situations without losing their dignity or compromising their values. One morning, Tyson visited one of these pilot schools. He watched as students acted out scenarios, practicing how to respond to conflict with understanding rather than anger. During one session, a young girl raised her hand with a profound observation. "You know what I noticed?" she said thoughtfully. "When we respond with kindness, it's not just the other person who feels better, we feel better too. It's like having a superpower that helps everyone at once." The airline's training program had evolved as well. They'd documented hundreds of cases where staff had successfully defused tense situations by applying the principles they'd learned. One flight attendant shared a particularly moving story about calming an aggressive passenger by simply listening to him with genuine concern. "He was yelling about a delayed flight," she recalled. "But when I really listened, I found out he was rushing to see his sick father. Once he felt heard, everything changed." That's what Mr. Tyson taught us: sometimes people just need to be seen as humans, not problems. The prison rehabilitation program where Tyson had spoken had reported remarkable results. Inmates who'd participated in the program showed significantly lower rates of confrontational behavior. One prisoner, serving a 10-year sentence, wrote a letter that brought tears to Tyson's eyes. "I used to think respect was something you had to demand," the inmate wrote. "Now I understand it's something you earn by giving it to others first. Your story showed me that the strongest person in the room isn't the one who can throw the hardest punch, it's the one who doesn't need to punch at all." Tommy, the young boy from the flight, had become something of a celebrity in his own right. His school had nominated him for a local leadership award after he started a peer mediation program called Champions of Peace. The program helped students resolve conflicts through understanding and respect rather than confrontation. Tom and Betty, the elderly couple, had been busy too. They'd started a community program in their retirement village called Wisdom Wednesdays, where they shared stories about choosing dignity over conflict. Their sessions had become so popular that other retirement communities were asking to start similar programs. You see, Betty would often say, age doesn't matter when it comes to learning new ways to treat each other. That day on the plane showed us that it's never too late to change how we respond to difficult situations. The university study was revealing fascinating patterns. They found that people who heard about the airport incident were more likely to pause before reacting in stressful situations. The researchers called it the dignity pause, that moment of reflection before choosing how to respond. One day, while Tyson was reviewing the study's findings, he received an unexpected visitor. It was the businessman from another airline who'd witnessed the original incident in the airport lounge. He'd been so moved by what he'd seen that he'd spent the past 6 months transforming his own company's culture. You know what's remarkable? The businessman shared. When we started treating our employees with the same dignity you showed that day, they naturally began treating our customers the same way. It's like kindness is contagious. The media had started noticing these changes too. But unlike the usual celebrity stories that flared up and died quickly, this one had staying power because it continued to produce real results. Companies reported lower conflict rates, schools saw reduced bullying incidents, and communities experienced stronger connections. Richard's Foundation had started documenting these success stories in what they called the Dignity Chronicles. Each story showed how choosing peace over pride had created positive changes in real situations. The chronicles became a valuable resource for organizations looking to improve their conflict resolution approaches. What we're seeing, Richard explained during a foundation meeting, is that dignity isn't just a nice idea, it's a practical solution to real-world problems. When people feel respected, they naturally become more cooperative and understanding. The young airline attendant from the original incident had been promoted again, this time to head of customer experience. Under her leadership, the airline had developed new ways to turn potentially negative situations into opportunities for connection. Every difficult passenger is an opportunity to demonstrate dignity in action, she would tell her staff. We're not just solving problems anymore, we're building bridges between people. As this chapter of the story unfolded, it became clear that what had happened that day in the airport wasn't just about one person choosing peace over pride. It was about showing people everywhere that there was always another way to respond, always another path to choose, always an opportunity to transform conflict into connection. 1 year after the airport incident, Tyson received an invitation that would take the story in yet another unexpected direction. The United Nations had taken notice of the widespread impact of the Choose Dignity movement and wanted him to address an international conference on conflict resolution. The conference room at the UN headquarters was filled with delegates from around the world. As Tyson took the stage, he couldn't help but marvel at how far a simple choice in an airport lounge had traveled. But what happened next would prove that the story still had more chapters to unfold. During his speech, a delegate from a country experiencing civil unrest approached the microphone. "Mr. Tyson," she began, her voice trembling with emotion, "your story has inspired us to implement dignity-based training for our police force. The results have been remarkable. We've seen a 40% reduction in violent confrontations." Other delegates shared similar stories. A representative from a South American nation described how they'd adapted the airline's Dignity First program for their public transportation system. Another spoke about implementing the school program in regions torn by ethnic conflicts. Back home, Tommy's Champions of Peace program had spread to over 50 schools nationwide. The young boy who had once been scared of turbulence was now teaching other children how to handle their fears and conflicts with grace. Local news stations began covering the program's success, showing clips of children resolving playground disputes through dialogue instead of confrontation. You know what's cool? Tommy told a reporter during one interview. When you help someone else feel better, you feel like a real champion. It's better than winning a fight. The prison rehabilitation program had expanded to facilities across the country. Inmates who completed the dignity-based conflict resolution training were showing significantly lower recidivism rates. One prison warden remarked that the atmosphere in his facility had transformed dramatically. These men came in thinking respect was about dominance, the warden explained. Now they understand it's about connection. We've seen fewer fights, more cooperation, and inmates actually helping each other grow. Richard's Better Way Foundation had partnered with major corporations to create workplace dignity programs. Companies reported improved employee satisfaction, reduced turnover, and better customer relationships. The foundation's research showed that businesses implementing these programs saw an average 30% decrease in workplace conflicts. During a corporate training session, Richard shared a profound observation: we spent years teaching people how to compete. Now we're teaching them how to connect, and the results are revolutionary. The airline industry had undergone its own transformation. The original airline's "dignity first" approach had become the gold standard for customer service. Other airlines began sending their staff to learn from their training program. The young attendant who had witnessed the original incident was now consulting for airlines worldwide. What we learned from Mr. Tyson wasn't just about handling difficult passengers, she would explain in her seminars. It was about recognizing the humanity in every interaction, even the challenging ones. Tom and Betty's Wisdom Wednesdays had evolved into a national senior mentoring program. Retirement communities across the country were pairing elderly residents with local schools, sharing their experiences and teaching children about choosing dignity over conflict. Age gives you perspective, Betty would say, but it's never too late to learn new ways of treating each other. These children teach us as much as we teach them. The university study had expanded to include research teams from 3 continents. They were documenting what they called dignity ripples, how one person's choice to respond with understanding could influence countless others to do the same. One particularly moving story came from a small town in the Midwest. A local business owner had been dealing with vandalism problems. Instead of pressing charges when they caught the young vandals, they invited them to help redesign the store's exterior. The project became a community effort that transformed not just the building, but the relationships within the town. The UN conference led to the creation of an international dignity initiative. Countries began sharing resources and strategies for implementing dignity-based conflict resolution in various cultural contexts. The program was particularly successful in regions with long-standing conflicts. A peace negotiator from one such region shared a powerful insight: when we focus on dignity rather than demands, we find common ground more easily. It's changing how we approach peace talks. Tyson's prison speaking engagements had led to a new program called Strength Through Peace. Inmates who completed the program became mentors for troubled youth, sharing their experiences and teaching young people how to choose different paths when faced with conflict. One former inmate, now a program mentor, put it simply: I spent 15 years thinking strength meant never backing down. Now I teach kids that true strength is knowing when to step back and choose peace. The media coverage had evolved from reporting on a viral moment to documenting a global movement. Journalists were tracking the ripple effects as they spread across communities, cultures, and continents. Each new story added evidence that choosing dignity over conflict could create lasting positive change. During a foundation board meeting, Richard shared something surprising. You know what's remarkable? We started this thinking we were teaching people how to handle conflict. What we're really teaching is how to prevent conflict by creating connection first. As the movement continued to grow, something unexpected happened. People began sharing stories of how they'd applied these principles in their personal lives, healing family rifts, resolving neighborhood disputes, and building stronger communities. A family therapist who had incorporated the dignity approach into her practice observed, when people feel their dignity is recognized, they become more open to understanding others. It's like unlocking a door that's been stuck shut. 18 months after that fateful day at the airport, Tyson found himself back in the same VIP lounge where it all began. But this time, he wasn't there as a passenger. The airline had invited him to help inaugurate something special. They were renaming it the Dignity Lounge, a symbol of how far they'd come. The ceremony wasn't just about changing a name. It represented a complete transformation in how the airline approached the concept of VIP status. The new lounge would operate on a rotating basis, allowing all passengers to experience premium service regardless of their ticket class. The goal was to show that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity. During the ceremony, the airline CEO shared something remarkable. When we first witnessed Mr. Tyson's response that day, we thought we were seeing the end of a potential conflict. Instead, we were watching the beginning of a revolution in human interaction. The businessman Richard, who had once demanded that VIP seat, stood beside Tyson during the ceremony. His transformation had been perhaps the most profound of all. His foundation had now helped implement dignity-based programs in over 500 organizations worldwide. Sometimes, Richard said during his speech, our worst moments can lead to our best transformations. That day, I was shown a better way, not through confrontation, but through dignity. It changed everything. Tommy, now a year older and more confident, had been invited to cut the ribbon. Before doing so, he shared his own perspective. Mr. Tyson showed us that champions aren't just people who win fights. They're people who help others win at life. The young airline attendant who had witnessed the original incident was now the airline's chief of customer experience. Under her leadership, the company had developed a new service philosophy that prioritized human connection over status distinctions. We've learned that luxury isn't just about comfortable seats and premium services, she explained. True luxury is being treated with dignity, regardless of your status or circumstances. The university research team had completed their initial study, and the results were groundbreaking. They had documented over 10,000 cases of what they called dignity cascade, situations where one person's choice to respond with dignity had triggered a chain reaction of positive changes in their community. Tom and Betty, the elderly couple from the flight, attended the ceremony as honored guests. Their Wisdom Wednesdays program had evolved into a national movement, with senior citizens across the country mentoring young people in the art of dignified conflict resolution. Look around this lounge, Betty said, her eyes twinkling. A year and a half ago, this was just a place where people sought comfort. Now it's a symbol of how we can all lift each other up. The prison rehabilitation program had achieved remarkable success. Recidivism rates among participants had dropped significantly, and several former inmates had become successful dignity coaches, helping others learn the principles that had transformed their own lives. One former inmate, now a program coordinator, shared his perspective. In prison, we thought respect came from fear. Mr. Tyson showed us it comes from how you treat others, especially when you could choose differently. The Better Way Foundation had documented countless stories of transformation. From schoolyards to corporate boardrooms, from community centers to international peace talks, the simple principle of choosing dignity over conflict was creating lasting change. During the ceremony, a surprise video montage played on screens throughout the lounge. It showed clips from around the world, children resolving conflicts peacefully, company executives serving alongside their employees, community leaders building bridges across divided neighborhoods. The UN Dignity Initiative had expanded to include peacekeeping training. Conflict zones reported significant reductions in violent incidents when dignity-based approaches were implemented. Peace negotiators had begun referring to it as the Tyson technique, responding to aggression with understanding rather than escalation. As Tyson watched the ceremony unfold, he reflected on how a single moment of choosing peace over pride had sparked such widespread change. The story had transcended its original context, becoming a template for how to handle conflict in any situation. The airline announced one final surprise. They were establishing a scholarship program for students who demonstrated exceptional leadership in promoting dignity-based conflict resolution. The first recipient would be Tommy, whose Champions of Peace program had now reached international status. "This isn't just about avoiding conflicts," Tommy said as he accepted the honor. "It's about creating connections. That's what Mr. Tyson taught us all." As the ceremony drew to a close, someone asked Tyson if he ever regretted giving up his VIP seat that day. His response captured the essence of everything that had unfolded: that seat was just a comfortable place to sit. "What we've built together is a comfortable way to live." The story had come full circle, but its impact continued to ripple outward. What began as a simple choice in an airport lounge had evolved into a global movement, proving that true strength lies not in the power to dominate, but in the courage to choose dignity over conflict, understanding over anger, and peace over pride. The Dignity Lounge stood as a symbol of this transformation, not just a place for premium service, but a reminder that every interaction carries the potential for positive change. As people passed through its doors, they were reminded of the choice that started it all, and the countless choices that followed, each one adding to the growing wave of change. The legacy of that day would continue to inspire new stories, new transformations, and new understanding of what it means to be truly strong. It wasn't just about Mike Tyson anymore, it was about everyone who chose to follow that example, proving that the greatest victories often come not from fighting, but from choosing a better way.